What we have here is a discrete function. And what we're going to be doing with this discrete function is finding the domain and the range. Now, the domain would be all values of x that work, that we could pick and get an output for this function. The x-axis runs left to right. So from the x-axis, we need to be able to look up and down and see what values of x could we pick to go up or down and hit a point in this discrete function. So starting on the left, I see at -5, I'm able to go up and hit the point. So -5 is an acceptable value for the domain because I do have a point at -5. The next point isn't until -3. So another value for the domain would be -3. There is another point at -1. There's another point at +1. At 2, there is a point. And finally, at 5, there is a point. Those are the only values that we can choose and get an output. The range, the values of y that we can get from this function. The y-axis runs up and down. Working from the bottom up, the first place I see is a point is down at -3. That is the smallest value that we can get from this function. Moving up, the next smallest value I find is -1. We then have a point on the x-axis, so that would be 0 as an output. We have a point at 1, a point at 2, and then finally we have a point at 4. These range values, the y's, are the only output values that we can get from this function. Here we have a discontinuous function. The domain values are all values of x that we could select and get a value for this function. X-axis runs left to right. And so we're going to look from the x-axis up or down to see if we would be able to encounter the function at that value. On the far left, the first value that I could pick and encounter this function would be at -5. And it keeps working. We get to this jump at 3, but that's okay, because we're just focused on, can we pick a value and encounter the function? We can, so we keep going. It ends up crossing the x-axis, so then we're going down to hit the function. And here at +1, again, there's a jump. That's okay. We're able to keep going. And drawing arrows visually is showing how I am picking a value for x, and I am able to go and get an output. It ends at 4. There is no function to the right of 4. So in this case, all of these values between -5 and +4 work. The range are the values of y that we can get from this function. I see that the very smallest that this function goes is at -5. Values up until -2 are all able to work. There's this last piece of the function that covers that interval. But then we have this gap. The function does not have any outputs between -1 and -2, so I have to stop the range. There will never be a time in this function that I'm able to get a value that is between -1 and -2. So there's never a time that I can pick a value for x and get, say, an output of -1.5. But at -1, the function picks up again, and it keeps increasing, and we get to 1, and then we have another gap. However, after 1, we're continuing on with a separate part of the function, so that's okay. And it keeps going up until 2. So the range has 2 parts. The first part was from -5 to -2. The second part is from -1 up through 2.